everybody, my name is Absinthe Allure. I'm a burlesque performer and a rhinestone enthusiast. I get a lot of questions both from my local performer family as well as performers kind of all over the place asking about rhinestones, how I stone my costumes, and so I'm going to be going deep into rhinestones today. This is going to end up being a two-part video, so welcome to part one. In today's video, we're going to be talking about all the things that you need to get started in rhinestoning your own costumes. This includes the glues I like to use, the tools I use for actual rhinestone application, as well as what kind of rhinestones to actually use based on what look you're going for and what budget you have. In part two, I'm going to actually be showing you how I rhinestone things. We're going to do a little rhinestone together as I get this costume ready for an upcoming show. And that'll teach you a little bit more about rhinestone application and the things that I think about when it comes to picking rhinestone colors and where I'm going to place things. First and foremost, when it comes to rhinestones, it's important to know what kind of rhinestone you're looking at and which one you are wanting to buy. I classify rhinestones into 4 different categories. Number 1 is the most expensive and the most shiny. That's going to be the crystal tier of rhinestones. Those are brands like Preciosa or Swarovski, where it's glass rhinestones but cut in a way and in a perfect enough kind of glass that really just makes it shine. This is the tier of stones that you're definitely going to be seeing on people like Dita Von Teese. She has a Swarovski sponsorship for a lot of her shows. This is also the kind of stone that you're more likely to see on bigger names in burlesque. Crystal rhinestones at this tier, do shine a lot more. They are a lot more expensive though, almost like 10 times literally more expensive than the stones that I personally use. And I find that unless you're working in really big venues like that, they really aren't needed, and even then you could easily get away with a mix of cheaper, more affordable stones and the crystal. For most of us who are performing, whether it be burlesque or drag or some other kind of performance art where you want to rhinestone your costumes, it's probably not going to be in like Vegas residencies with big expensive lights and an audience further away. So you can get away with a little bit less sparkle, especially if it's going to be in more of a small theater or bar or club lighting. That brings me to glass rhinestones. That's the ones that I personally use and the ones that I prefer. Glass rhinestones are kind of the next best thing to crystal. They're still glass. They just aren't quite as shiny, aren't quite as precisely cut in the way that makes glass crystal. These ones are much more affordable, like literally 10 times more affordable oftentimes than Preciosa or Swarovski. They have a ton of different reflection options, tons of different color options, and that's just what I personally use for my costumes the majority of the time. Next down the rung are jelly or resin rhinestones. These ones are usually made of plastic or resin and are cut to look like glass rhinestones. They have usually a lot more color options than glass rhinestones, so that's definitely a benefit, but they aren't as shiny. And we'll talk a little bit more about why when we start to talk about rhinestone finishes. If you're gonna go with resin or jelly rhinestones, I would probably recommend mixing in a couple glass rhinestones within them, so that way you get a little bit more extra sparkle from the glass, as well as a little bit more budget friendly with the resin. But ultimately, the pricing differences I found aren't that much different if you're buying smaller quantities. Obviously, if you're buying in bulk, the price is going to be reflected a little bit differently. And lowest in that hierarchy of quality of stones is going to be your plastic stones. These are usually sold places like Dollar Tree or Michael's or Joann's. These ones are weirdly expensive for what you're actually getting, usually because they're sold in smaller packages and to an audience that isn't buying thousands and thousands of rhinestones at a time. But these plastic stones, while they are really cheap, they also look pretty cheap. They're harder to pass off for a higher quality stone. They also don't really sparkle as much as I like, and personally I find that in the long run your work is going to look a lot nicer, look a lot more expensive, and you might actually save a couple bucks if you just go with a higher quality stone as opposed to the easier to get access to plastic stones. So now that we've talked about stone types, let's actually talk about stone finishes and how a rhinestone sparkles. Typically with a rhinestone, it's a multifaceted faced piece of glass or acrylic or resin or plastic. This allows light in, and it usually will hit a metallic or shiny bottom that then reflects the light out through all of those little different facets, and that's what makes it sparkle. Rhinestones can be really, really sparkly on their own without an additional film over the top, but there are a lot of rhinestone options that put a film over the top of the outside of the finished rhinestone to give it a different effect. These are usually called AB rhinestones, AB standing for Aurora Borealis, and we'll talk about the differences between Aurora Borealis and a standard stone. For example, this is a regular clear rhinestone and this is an AB clear rhinestone. In theory, they should be the same color, but one of them has that Aurora Borealis film over the top, which helps it reflect different colors. So you'll notice that the clear stone shines bright white and is true to color as it sparkles, whereas the AB stone, you can see hints of yellow and green and purple, and it reflects all of those different colors as the light hits it. I personally like to use a mix of both AB stones and the standard stones because I think it gives a lot of dimension to a piece and can be a fun way of incorporating more shine and more color. Typically, this AB covering is also what gives resin or jelly stones its shine. I've found some that might have that metallic on the inside so it can reflect light properly, but more often I see the resin stones with a film over the top of it to help reflect the light. So again, it will shine because it has that coating, but it doesn't quite shine in the same way that a glass rhinestone does, which is why I have that preference. The real big caution in working with AB stones is to look at multiple pictures of them if you're buying them online, so that way you know what kind of color they're casting. One that sticks out to me especially is the AB Jet, I believe, is a black stone, and while regular jet colored stones shine black and have a little bit more of a subtle and I think sophisticated shine, the AB version shines blue because it has that film over it and the way it reflects light. The black stone now looks blue. Having that information helps you make better decisions because I personally, if I was wanting to stone something all black, wouldn't want those pops of blue if that's not my intended goal. But if you are wanting pops of blue, or if you have a blue costume and you're wanting a super deep AB color, that could be a good option for you. It all really depends on what kind of finish and what kind of accentuation you want with your finished piece. Now that you've decided what material stone you want and whether you want solid, AB, or a mix of both, let's talk about stone sizing. I personally have found that size 16 and 20 are my two favorite sizes to work with. When you're buying stones online, you'll usually see the size listed as like SS16, SS20, SS10. That stands for stone size, and the measurements I believe are like 4.5 millimeters for an SS20 or something thereabouts, but it's much easier to just talk about it in the system that they've created for stones. Now I'll typically use SS20 as my larger stone, SS16 as my more detailed stone. You can absolutely go smaller. Some people go as small as like an SS10, which is pretty tiny. That's more of like a nail art size stone, but those people are much more patient than I am. The more sizes that you add, the more opportunities you're giving light to bounce off it differently, so it will make your overall look more sparkly. When I do go larger than an SS20, it's usually a sew-on stone or a metal clasped stone. I have good examples of metal clasped stones here. These ones you can sew on, you probably should sew on. You could also glue some of these guys on and get along just fine. These add, like I said, much more dimension to your costume. It adds a lot more interesting reflection points for more sparkle opportunities, and you can start to build different shapes with these. Usually if I'm going to do clusters of stones or make a pattern out of my stones, I'll opt for these guys. Hopefully at this point we have a pretty good understanding of rhinestones, at least enough to get us started. So what other things are we going to need before we start rhinestoning our own costumes? You're going to want a rhinestone picker. Mine I was able to get super cheap. It's just a little stick. It has a little pokey pointer end on one, so once you put glue down, put a stone down, you're able to move it around a little bit before the glue sets. And most importantly, on the other end, we have this little wax pencil tip. You don't have to use a rhinestone picker quite like mine. They do make wax pencils that look just like regular pencils, but as you sharpen them, there's no lead, it's just more wax. And that can be helpful. Within the kit that I got, and I can leave that linked down in the description below for you guys, I also got a pair of tweezers. These ones are a little bit different from the ones that you would use, you know, on your eyebrows. These ones make it easier to move stones around. Again, if I can't like poke things into position, I can poke them around with my tweezers. I can also remove stones if I maybe put the wrong color down or I didn't like the placement. This is a lot easier to remove stones with, especially in hard to reach areas than trying to get my fingers. I'm also able to place stones with this, so if I wanted to, I could throw away the rhinestone picker and only use the little tweezers to put things on my costume. It's especially helpful when you're working with larger stones or pearls. I find that half pearls work okay with the wax pen, but over time, because it was so rounded at the top, those pearls just wouldn't want to hang on very much. I also keep handy just a little tray. You can absolutely buy rhinestone trays online. Bella Sin shared one that's really, really cool that helps to separate the sizes of rhinestones. So it's like a big column and you dump all of them at the top, and then as you shake it, all the SS20s settle, and then all the SS16s, and all the way down the track. If that's something that you would find beneficial, that's totally fine. I just use, you know, tops of candles, or this one's for some other kind of jar, and that works just as fine for me. You're gonna want glue. I currently am using Jewel-It, mostly because I ran out of my E6000 FabriFuse. I like the Jewel-It just fine. As I wear my costumes more often, I'm finding it doesn't have as great of a hold as the E6000 FabriFuse, but it's something that I feel okay continuing to use, and it's a couple of stones are bound to fall off here and there. The E6000 FabriFuse is the one that I would prefer, and the one that I would recommend getting if you're given that choice. It is a couple bucks more expensive than the Jewel-It, but I like the applicator a little bit better. It has a clear plastic nozzle, so you can actually kind of see the glue coming through. It also, I find, holds better just with the costumes that I've done so far. And because it's the FabriFuse, it's a lot cleaner. It's a little bit of a different kind of glue than traditional E6000, and it's low fumes. If you lock yourself in your bedroom and rhinestone for 8 hours straight, you're probably still gonna get a little bit of a funny brain feeling from all of the fumes, but the FabriFuse is not nearly as bad as the traditional E6000. As someone with a lot of pets in my home, that was something very important to me. If you're choosing to go the traditional E6000 route, there's plenty of people that choose that. I personally find it to be a bit too stringy. If you're going to do it, I recommend getting a little like glue syringe, so you're a little bit more precise in where you're putting your glue. Personally, I find the FabriFuse just works so much better, so I don't bother with the big bottles of the E6000. So to run through a list of my personal preferences, I prefer glass rhinestones. I prefer size SS16 to SS20, and I prefer additional bigger stones. You can get different shapes in either the metal clasp or the sew-on. My number one preference for glue is going to be the E6000 FabriFuse. My number two does okay is the Jewel-It. That's what we're going to be doing in part 2 of today's video, is the Jewel-It. And then personally, if you can splurge for this little kit that I got as far as application tools go, highly recommend. Mine came with 2 different wax pens. It came with 4 different additional wax pen tips, and I've already gone through one of them. And it has that little tweezer, which is really nice. You'll also probably want to keep a pair of scissors around just for funsies. I know that we're probably going to be cutting out tags as one of our very first things once we get into actually stoning our costume. And then you're going to want some kind of work surface that's going to be safe from the glue. That was all for part 1 of our rhinestoning video. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you were able to learn a little bit more about rhinestones. I'll go ahead and leave the products that I've mentioned down in the description below so it's nice and easy for you guys to find. And I hope to see you in part 2, where we work together to actually put stones on a costume and make it look really sparkly and fun. I'll see you guys in part 2.